Not too long ago, I was crying over what felt like the loss of my stories in the games I was in or making. I felt like that no one had cared for my stories and that the reason was due to my writing either being shit or that no one cared. While I was crying about this to my partner, they asked me why it was important that the story I wanted to tell was in a game format and not just some writing on the side. After all, I could have just written the story I wanted without the influence of the limitations of scope of a school project had, and without the deviations of adding new game mechanics or taking them out. I came to the realization that putting the story into the game was important to me because of something that games do that other mediums haven't been able to replicate: the feeling of being a part of the story. I spoke about how games like Ultra Kill would be a lot more boring as a book, as how many times could you write about V1 slaughtering enemies at high speeds and unlocking new weapons to mow down the fiends of hell without it becoming repetitive? How can you write about the tension of killing that boss with just a sliver of health left or the frustrations of the sand blocking the healing mechanic? How can one put into the words that another being would feel about the difficulty of V2 and Gabriel and what it meant to finally beat them after 70 plus tries? While I imagine there is a way, I don't believe you can have the same varied differences of stories that can come out of the same story as beating through Ultra Kill. The player being V1 is what matters, and the experiences that you go through around the story of V1, diving their ways through hell, is personal. You can't tell people how V1 slaughtered Gabriel or struggled or baited him to fall into a hole without a set power strength. That strength matters to the story, even if it doesn't directly affect the plot, because it's all part of the player's story. When I had played through Cyberpunk 2077, it left me in bed for weeks thinking about the ending I had chosen. My V had believed Arasaka truly did have something for them at the end of the line, and that despair of not only losing the ride or die of a friend that was Johnny, but also knowing that despite selling out to a corporation, all was still lost. Judy was going to break up and leave because she hated what the city had stood for, and that V had chose to abandon everyone for the sake of a chance to live, and so did many of the other relations I had made throughout the game. These are story beats that came and hit me because I had made them. I was the V that wasn't able to stick to their teachings, stick to their values as a kid from Haywood. That broke the hearts of not only their lover, but also a friend who was able to finally forgive himself and love those around him. Sinnerman was a side quest with a morbid ending that can have V crucify a man who believes it is the only way to atone for his sins. Throughout the quest, you're able to back out at any time and are even encouraged to by other NPCs. I have read about the quest and watched it through other players. I am no stranger to gruesome content in games, seeing many fatalities and had the pleasure in Blade and Sorcery of watching the enemy's life drain out of them. But Sinnerman was different. The prayer before the crucifixion with Joshua, watching him set up on the cross, the other NPCs recording it for the XBD, finally having the button prompts to nail him in. It wasn't the fact that it was just some sick XBD to be watched, nor was it having him die one of the most painful deaths imaginable. It was the fact that you needed to nail him not with just a button press, but multiple. The nails didn't go in easily and needed multiple strikes to get through. Hearing V recite their script and watching the nails go in was something different. It felt personal, it felt uncomfortable, and while I can never do that mission again, I can say it left a profound thought in my mind. It scarred my mind space, but I felt as though I could finally understand how players could feel so attached to their actions. Similarly, when my dad played through Red Dead Redemption 2, he had a blast being the biggest asshole in the West, looting, killing, all as such. But when Arthur's life was tied to his recent affliction of tuberculosis, it not only changed the fate of the cowboy, but also my dad's perspective of the game. Over the game, he felt Arthur's frustrations with Dutch's insistence of not cashing out and quitting while he was ahead, always insisting on another heist. He felt the despair and questioned the actions he had caused as Arthur when it became very real that Arthur indeed had the terminal illness. Like Arthur, he began to change his gameplay. He became more kind and tried anything he could do to change his reputation. It was a moment that put my dad and Arthur in sync with the morals and dread that came knowing that Arthur's legacy was tarnished from his actions, that he would die without the world remembering the man whose heart was too big for the gang and who wanted something better. Cyberpunk Red came to me at the height of my cyberpunk obsession, and I had my friends and sister join me as the Legends of the Automatic Hazards, which started earlier this year. Nearly 9 months after the game had started, the group had their first player death, which also happened to be my first player death as a game master. My sister's character, Omni Shambles Pearl, was shot by a sniper trying to save her crewmate Mia, who was already unconscious and barely alive. This was a death that couldn't be scripted. It only happened because of player choices and the roll of the dice. No one played to die that session, and I had already written character arcs for her character. The best part was the fact that this wasn't in a particularly important session. It was just a filler session because a player was unable to join. a narrative beat that changed the course of the team's actions that could only be told through the dice and through player choices was made. Another character, Maluzina, had caught up with her father figure, learned that he had sold her hometown out to make way for his career. She was angry and ready to pull the trigger to flatline him, but the dice said that the shot missed. She was pissed and she could have chosen to keep firing until she flatlined the guy, but she didn't. The player then was in question of their player character, needed to rethink Maluzina's goals, carrying out the story of why she couldn't kill him. This is a long-winded way to say that games, at least to me, have so many personal stories outside of what is scripted, that even with scripted stories and goals, players being that character feels so much. For that moment, you become the character. You become the V that sold out. The Arthur who wonders about his legacy he leaves behind. The V1 who barely scraped by Gabriel. You become these characters and have agency, even in that scripted tale. Games as a whole are able to put you in these shoes and make you become someone else. And I think that is the beauty of the medium. It's why I don't want to write stories that are just words. I want to make them games. I want my stories to be something that a player becomes for a brief moment. And hopefully I'll be able to do that someday. This is my love letter to game stories.